Hello everyone, and welcome back to our class in rhetorical theory. This week we're going to talk about epistemology. It's a philosophical term that few people know what it means or use it in the right way, and when you read it in various journal articles and books, you may stumble over this term, have no clue what it is, and don't take the time to look it up. Although if you knew Greek, it would be a very simple term. If we all knew Greek and we all knew Latin, we'd hardly ever need a dictionary, is how it works. Most of our philosophical vocabulary comes from Greek and a little bit from German these days. Let's dive in here. So what is epistemology? What does it mean here? Before we get to that, we should do a little bit of review, no? Okay, so last week we learned that the last couple of weeks rhetoric had to hide out in the church for about 1500 years, where its principles were taught under the heading of homiletics. And finally, in the mid-1700s, a young man who was in ministry school, but who had also performed in the theater for years prior to going to college to become a minister. But while in college at Oxford University, Pembroke College, universities are made up of colleges. While there, he was taught the principles of rhetoric from the various departments where he had to take courses. And somehow, in his mind, dedicated to preaching the gospel, he took the best of everything he'd found from everywhere in his life, and he essentially put together a very effective rhetorical practice on a level with the greatest orators of history. So people took note. This was unusual. Nobody had seen anything like this. So philosophers were some of the first to notice this guy. Performers from the theater noticed how skilled he was in bringing what he clearly learned in the theater into the pulpit. And they went to hear him preach just to see how fabulous he was with his excellent voice and his facial expressions and his acting out of biblical stories. I'm talking about George Whitefield, you'll recall. And teachers took notice of this. George Campbell up in Scotland, and a theater community member, Thomas Sheridan, who taught elocution and began the elocutionary movement to teach how to use gestures and bodily action to most effectively communicate messages. And this was incorporated into rhetoric, as rhetoric kind of became alive again, came out of these homiletics teaching departments where they taught you how to give a sermon with all of your points and all of the usual boring stuff, and it was energized. It also energized homiletics, for that matter, but all of a sudden then we have Edmund Burke here, who stood up and helped Great Britain fight their way through a war that began in 1776. Being on the losing side, he perhaps is not as great a statesman in our culture as he is in England, but he brought a rhetorical practice to Great Britain's politics that hadn't been seen ever, because now, when kings and monarchs were declining in their power and sharing it with legislative bodies, which is the practice anywhere they still have a king or a monarch, rhetoric was needed again. Still don't need it where there's a dictator or an emperor. You can get your head cut off pretty quickly or get you shot. So the elocutionary movement went mainstream and rhetoric was back. It was put into practice pretty quickly, but we'll get to that towards the end of the lecture. Epistemology, the origin and nature of knowledge. That's what it means. The origin, or the study of, it's an ology word, right? It's the study of, the origin and nature of knowledge. Episteme means knowledge. Where does knowledge come from? have a picture here, Pilate, this famous scene, recreated in many movies and plays, saying to Jesus, who just told him that he knows the truth and he comes from the truth and brings truth to the world. And Pilate says, "What is truth?" No, that's not how he said it. Not some philosophical discussion with Plato. Pilate was a seasoned soldier, a governor. He very cruel person at times, very practical, very well educated, and he simply said, "What is truth? Get out of here with this truth nonsense. We know how the world works." And so, kind of an interesting thing happening there. One person bringing in an epistemology of practical experience, of studying and learning rhetoric, of being taught things from elders, from the culture. And here's a guy saying, no, truth comes from God. Now we've covered 3 areas here, just in that little picture. Wisdom of your elders in the culture, truth passed down through storytelling in oral cultures, even in cultures that began to use writing early on, the Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamian culture. All of these stories are preserved because there's truth in them. There are principles for how to live life, how to get along in the world, how to do better at things than we are. And so that's probably that first source of truth comes just storytelling was the media, and the truth is embedded in stories with the actions for good or for evil of these epic characters who succeeded or failed, and we can all learn lessons from these stories. Even today, this is still a very valid way we learn things, especially as we're younger. The Greeks found that truth was discovered isn't the right word, truth was achieved, maybe not found, I should change that verb to achieved via rhetorical debate. You and I sit down, we disagree on some things, we agree on others. We talk about what we disagree on, we weigh it, we try it, we give examples, we apply logic to the problem, and we can throw out some ideas that we find that, yeah, that one kind of breaks down, doesn't it, when you really analyze it. And but other ideas, other things we believe are true, we test them, we debate them, we put them through different examples, and no, this principle does seem to work out. People who do stupid things in life often end up in poverty, and we can come up with a maxim even that can be passed down. Early to bed, early to rise makes a person healthy, wealthy, and wise. Put it in a nice little rhetorical form like that. But we have talked about it, and we brought in our past experience, things we've learned, things that came from our culture, and used the rhetorical process to try them and come up with what we believe is true. Also used in the legal field. Is somebody guilty or innocent? Put them through the rhetorical debate, and we can come up with a good solid answer to that we're satisfied with. That's usually right. Truth, as dictated by religion, revealed to a prophet, shared with the people. It's a revealed truth. These kind of truths are very powerful within a community that holds great respect for that religion, for a community that religion guides how the community is to live their lives. And if you look at the world's great religions, it is about community survival at its essence. And we do these things, we practice these things, and there are some universal principles that religion has revealed to us that make life better for the community, for everybody. Yeah, you may not like it that your neighbor has a really good looking wife and you can't sleep with her, but it's good for the community to have these rules, because things can tend to break down when you have jealous people running around with knives and swords, And so let's just not do that anymore. Religion was the quick way to discover that and learn it. Perhaps it came from the wisdom of the culture, perhaps even a little rhetorical debate. But typically the prophet comes down from the mountain, like Moses, with the 10 Commandments and says, don't do these things. Do these things, don't do those things. And even if you look at the 10 Commandments, the first 4 tell us how to interact with God. And then the last 6 tell us how to interact with one another. Don't lie to each other. Don't steal from each other. Don't stare at your neighbor's beautiful vineyard and wish it was yours and plot to kill him so you can get his stuff. Yeah, that doesn't work. You can't have a community, and if you don't have a community, the people next door that have a really strong community, they come and take your stuff in a war and kill all of you because you're not strong enough with all your infighting to survive. And at some level there, it comes down to survival of the community. So religion really assists with that. Where religion goes sideways is when you have the person that comes in and says, yeah, God's talking to me. Let's go live this way. And we'll have strange marriage practices. And we'll have a community economy going on, but the people at the top get to have more of the money that we all earn from that, and everybody else has to wear plain clothes and live in poverty, because poverty is good for your soul. Yeah, religion can go sideways when people do not try and test the prophet and find out, yeah, this guy probably is hearing some pretty good stuff from God. If you're an atheist, you know, maybe he's just a really smart guy who figures things out and has some really good advice for everybody. If you do believe that person is from God and hearing the voice of God, then, you know, give it a try, prove it, test it, try it, and it should work for you okay. Truth then, after Descartes came along, was discovered by science. Science ended up taking over from between the mid-1500s, and by the time we get into the literally about 1800, 1780s, 1800s, science took over. This is where truth comes from. We still like religion. We still have truth from religion. It tells us how to live. But now we're learning so many fabulous things about technology. Science began to eclipse religion. And science even began to try to disprove some of the truth from religion. Too often, it's in a way that starts allowing all the nasty practices, because now if there's no religious truth backing up the fact that you really shouldn't cheat on the person you're in this committed relationship with, because it screws things up for a lot more than just you. Unfortunately, too often, this truth science is finding is tearing down some of these do's and don'ts, and not good for society. And you got a fence that's been there a long time. Be very careful about tearing it down. Figure out what it's there for and what it's keeping in, what it's keeping out. So science isn't, and all of these sources of truth have their strengths and their weaknesses. But don't be thinking science has all the answers to everything, because so far they don't. And as Vico taught us, religion, politics, education, there are many areas where we have to make important decisions, and science doesn't do us much good at all, and we need to use some of the other forms, some of the other epistemes, if you will. If you want to call that a list of 6 epistemes, that's fine. Agreement of the community seems to be a new one. We're going to change long-standing practices simply because we all agree that that's the best thing to do. And sometimes this is good. And let's just say the abolition of slavery was one of those. And finally, William Wilberforce, after laboring for 20 years ceaselessly, and I do urge you to watch that movie. I think the movie is Amazing Grace, and it's the story of William Wilberforce, a British politician who led the abolition movement in the early 1800s. And finally, enough people agreed with Wilberforce, who didn't really use science, and perhaps didn't even use religion to persuade people that slavery was wretched and vile, and not wretched's not the word, just vile, evil, wrong on so many levels. And it took him 20 years, but he finally persuaded, and the community, the British legislature, agreed to abolish slavery. Then the abolition movement started in the United States, and we were slower to, we'd been listening in on the debate for 40 years prior to the Civil War, but we had to have a war over it here. Yeah, the Civil War was about other things, but slavery was a big part of it. And so the agreement of the community, this is wrong, this is bad, and so they abolished slavery, and that solved all our racial problems, right? Well, we're still working on this one. Still agreeing amongst many people in the community that oppression of anybody of any sort, for any reason, is not good for the community. A lot of people are agreeing on that, and now looking at a lot of different places than formal slavery, where somebody actually owns your body and gets to decide what you have to do and what you don't do. I felt like that before, being in debt and having to work at a job to send all my money to banks. No, let's not go there. Agreement of the community, a valid source of truth and knowledge. Got to be careful, like with all of them, and we're stepping into some areas with community agreement, like when we all agree that if you feel you're a woman on the inside, sir, then we'll call you a woman and you can compete in women's sports in college. And so we're reading more and more stories about trans women who still are full of testosterone and heavy, strong frames and big muscles, and compete in women's sports and take home the prize. Is that fair? Is that right? Should we be agreeing on such things? Let's be careful. Things can go sideways, as we've seen in science, as we've seen in religion, even as we've seen from our elders who had myths and stories that maybe worked once but don't work anymore. Inferred from feelings is another interesting episteme. There was a comedian I was watching, kind of put me onto this one, who said, he was arguing with his wife about something, and he just had all his logic and made all his good points. And she replied to him, "But that's not how I feel." How do you argue with somebody's feelings? They feel what they feel. They have reasons they may not even understand, but the feeling is real. And this isn't a new idea. Jonathan Edwards argued for this back in the 1730s. And when he said, you can know that God is real when you walk out in nature and you feel the sunshine on your face and your skin, and you see the beautiful leaves budding out of the trees as spring arrives, and you're just filled with a sense of awe, experiencing the sublimity of this, and you feel, yes, God is real. And Edwards says, and he was a sharp mind, one of the sharpest academics and philosophers in American history at that period. He says, yeah, you can take that to the bank. God's real. It's okay. That's how you know. So, inferred from feelings, not a new idea, but it seems to be making a comeback when so many people, and this works hand in hand with the agreement of the community, enough people feel, this is what's true for me. This is the way I feel. And enough people agree, well, especially in a democratically run society, we can all vote on it and change laws, and that's going to be how we move forward. Sometimes we just have to say, we'll see how that works out for you. Let me know. And in some areas of religion, science, community, things haven't worked out so well. Other times it works out great. And so maybe we're kind of back to that scientific method isn't so wrong after all. But isn't that what rhetorical debate is about, without having scientists around to say absolutely this is true? We test ideas, trial and error. We try things. We try to remember best we can what's happened, what's gone wrong in the past, and we search for truth and knowledge. So, pilot there is what we would call, before I go on to that, let's just take a moment. For students of rhetoric, persuasion is best achieved by presenting arguments and evidence from the epistemological sources, from the source of truth, that an audience most respects. So you look at these four pictures. Who are these people? You've got a group of Islamic clerics. How are you going to persuade them something's true? You probably ought to be quoting the Quran or well-known Islamic clerics that they have great respect for, their elders, their traditions. Science, they might disagree with you on some things, agree on others. Not the best source of truth. And I think all cultures and all people have respect for these various epistemological sources of truth. But one is going to be preeminent in their minds. Lower left here, you've got a group of scientists at a convention listening to academic papers and the results of experiments being presented. You know, you don't go into that group and say, well, you know, I've been doing these chemical experiments and I just feel that this formula is going to work out for us. No, they're not going to go for the intuitive knowledge, for the feelings, your sensations. They want the hard facts. They want statistical tests, or they want overwhelming evidence using qualitative methods. That's what will persuade them best. They have feelings too. They like stories, but you better have the facts there for them and the results of tests. How about these hippies from the 70s? Well, yeah, maybe how you feel is a good thing, and these drugs have to be good because they make me feel good and make me forget my problems. An agreement of the community that these things are okay and all right. Maybe a little religion, depends on your background, and there are a lot of people that have rejected their church who still hold fast to principles of a religion that says this is good, be nice to people, love people. And that was one thing in the hippie movement. Love everywhere, gotta have love. Can't get enough love. And even became a theme in trying to oppose the Vietnam War, and might have been the thing that got John Lennon murdered by maybe a radical. There's a conspiracy theory about that one. Too much love going around there when he sings All You Need Is Love. A group of children, you know, they like science, but you better keep it simple, and they'll respect that. But stories, wisdom from the elders, people that did this or did that, and it went well and it went wrong. Stories of betrayal, stories of loyalty. Children love these, and these stories get embedded in their favorite cartoon characters. Stories of ingenuity and not quitting, just keeping at it, pushing right to the end. Children love them. We all love them, though. Don't we still respect these stories of our elders? These epistemic sources, they don't. It's not like we mature from one to another. We just learn to appreciate more deeply as we go. But if you want to persuade people, you better have a healthy dose. Let's say 60% of the material you present to that group of scientists better be scientific. You can include your stories, and you can include your feelings. You can even show religious principles that back up what science is saying too. But go heavy on the thing they respect the most. All right. This idea of science as epistemic led to a period of time in human history called modernism. Modernism was when we took the principles of science and we became a modern world. We had inventions, we had a better way of doing things, and let's get rid of just making things one at a time by hand in your little shop, and let's have factories and assembly lines, and let's get the scientists to invent things like the light bulb, the electric motor, to internal combustion engines to drive our machines and our factories, and let's Now we have machines that can make machines, and the machinist was born. That trade that uses some special tools to carve up a metal into very precise forms for making even better machines. And in a sense, you would think it takes a better machine to make the next one, and no, some rather simple machines actually can make you help create very complicated things, just as the knife can help you carve wood into an amazing form. Modernism. Well, modernism went sideways, and it went sideways during the Civil War. Right when it got started, we invented rifling in the barrels of guns, and all of a sudden you're not throwing a knuckleball at home plate, and you don't know which way it's going to spin or turn. You had a rifle barrel that shot that bullet in a straight line, and all you had to account for, scientifically, was how far the bullet will fall by the laws of gravity over a certain distance at a certain speed, and you had to account for the wind pushing the bullet left or right. What is your wind direction? What's the effect? And you could become a sniper, and these people were good hunters, and they went into battle with these guns that were made in factories that were amazing, and just killed each other in droves. Bloody war and deadly weapons. And then World War II came along, and or World War I, mustard gas, chemical weapons, mortars that would lob explosives with shrapnel right into your little hideout, killing everybody within a radius and wounding more people within a larger radius. Science, thank you science, you've brought us so many wonderful things. And then World War II, we're catching on to some of this stuff, everybody's hiding out now, but they began bombing cities, bombing factories, killing civilians, and then finally, and that had been against the rules of war for a long time, and then we drop atomic bombs on Japan. And a new world is born. Modernism has some good things about it, and we have retained, I hope, much of what is good, but there's a slice of it that is inventing things, ways to kill people, ways to oppress people, ways to control people, and they're still in effect, and modernism is still bringing us some nasty stuff. And so postmodernism was born after World War II, when some serious philosophers really began to doubt the effectiveness of modernism in creating a better world and began to question it. Jacques Derrida was one of these who questioned the scientist. And a lot of his work focuses on, what do you really know? Can you know anything? Can anybody communicate their idea with you in a way that you can really understand it? And he critiqued communication itself, as well as critiquing what does a word mean, what does a sentence mean. And I really had to grapple with his ideas as he challenged sacred texts, as he challenged things I had held as solid sources of truth in my life. And I concluded that Derrida is right in many ways and wrong in a few other key ways. We can communicate. We can take ideas from my head and transfer them into yours. Maybe you're only getting 80% of it, maybe 30%, maybe 90%, maybe I'm an excellent communicator and you get all of it. But even then, you probably still don't get all of it. But ideas can be transmitted. We can know what a word means. Derrida would go so far as to say you can't even know what a word means. It's just an arbitrary symbol, and meaning is different for everybody. Well, this postmodernism started really invading philosophy, and everything was questioned. Let's just tear down all the stories, because so many of our stories, this episteme of our cultural and religious traditions, meaningless, not good for us anymore. We'll take science and what it offers us, but postmodernist philosophers have pointed out a lot of oppression. That's probably where their best work has been, is you're hurting people over here. But they also have done some damage to the ways we have done things as well. But two competing philosophies have arisen out of this. The first is essentialism. Essentialism is basically a scientific worldview that says things are what they are, and you need to discover it, just experiment and figure it out, figure out what this is. People apply essentialism to their minds, to their being, and say, who am I? Using a form of the verb to be. What am I? Who am I? The Native Americans, you would go on a spirit quest and have a vision and be revealed to you who you are, and then you would be given a name. The thing is named. Doesn't that sound like stasis theory? What is it? We call it this, and that calling defines it, and then you come back with your real name. But people today, young people, really struggle. Well, who am I? Well, I'm this kind of person because that's how I feel. Well, you know, Freudian psychoanalysis, an early science that came out of modernism, would look deeply into your past and your childhood, and there's some good, valid ideas there, though Freudianism has really been tossed out. But he's on to some things, and it was scientific about who you are, who you were shaped, how you were shaped into the person you were through good parents, through bad parents, through evil parents, neglectful parents, and all these things that mold a child's personality and belief system and hurt them in ways. Putting the hand on the hot stove, and now you don't want to touch the stove anymore. In fact, you don't want to touch anything even remotely resembling being hot anymore. Yeah, we learn that way. That's scientific. But that gets applied to people hurting you, and all of a sudden we are socially constructed people, socially constructed beings, and our truths become socially constructed because we agree on what's real, we agree on what's true, and so that becomes truth for us. And I feel that this is true, so that becomes truth for me. And enough of us feel that way, we'll agree on it, and it gets to be even a stronger truth. I've been arguing for some years now that really, when it comes down to it, my epistemic ordering of that list is something I decide on through personal experience, through life, through being persuaded, and that I'm a ratio of some form of essentialism. Yeah, there are truths, there are real things, there are essences to something, but we construct a lot of it. I'm 20/80, probably. Essentialism to constructionism. Think about what your ratio is. You know, are you more 70% essentialist? You're a scientist at heart. And yeah, there's a few things that get constructed, and you're willing to go along with that, and you can try something new, and hey, I like this, so let's do more of that. You know, think about that, and you should come to a decision within yourself on this. What's my ratio of essentialism to constructionism? We go back to that list of our epistemes. Received wisdom, learning through debate, dictated or revealed by religion, discovered by science, agreement of the community, decided, let's say, by the community, and inferred from your feelings. We're a blend of all of these, and just understand your blend. Maybe we're getting to feelings here. But I'm going to go on record saying, yeah, 80-20. 80% socially constructed through our wisdom, rhetorical debate, even religion, and agreement in feelings, and 10% essentialism would just be, in some senses, religion is very essentialist, and science is very essentialist. That's why they don't get along too well. And it's because their own revelation or discovery, they have their own different epistemological resources. Okay, so what's the point of epistemology? Well, I think the point is, who's got the power? You know, it's like saying, I know where truth comes from, and you don't. Therefore, we're going to do things my way. Now, you really have a problem when you have talks and meetings between people that have been at war that really, in one sense, they both value peace and they don't want to kill each other anymore. But in other ways, they're, well, in this case, two different religious views that are intolerant of one another, which leads to war. And, you know, which one of these views is right? No, truth comes from the Quran. No, truth comes from the Torah. And you have the problem in the Middle East between Palestine and Israel as one example. Which way is better? How can this ever get settled? And really, they've got to agree on probably something like, you know, the received wisdom of our elders, that it's not good to kill. And both of our religions teach that. And it's not good for us to cheat each other and lie and steal from each other. We can live together as good neighbors, as they did from the rise of Islam until probably the 1900s at some point. All of a sudden, there was just complete conflict there. Well, it was probably 1948 when Israel moved back into the Middle East. But prior to that, Jews and Muslims lived peacefully side by side, typically Muslims in power, and just simply taxed the people that they conquered. And as long as you paid your taxes to the Muslims, they were a very tolerant people. All right. So the source of truth, as it's employed in rhetoric, and this is kind of looking at rhetoric from the other angle, it reveals the beliefs, attitudes, and values of your audience. So you've got to know what those beliefs, attitudes, and values are, where truth comes from for them to be good at doing rhetoric. If you want to understand people and how advertising is working, look at their epistemological beliefs. And once you define those, you know what will persuade them, you know why the persuasion works. And yet it's, in some ways, just a subtle struggle for power. I want you to spend your money on our college here, this fine university, rather than going to the fly-by-night university where all the classes are online and we don't even have a building for you to come talk to people in. So anytime you want to come stop by my office and chat, we're here. Yeah, a subtle struggle for power, for economic dominance, just for money. Maybe that's what all of this is about with audiences, and persuasion is about power. Essentially, I want you to do what I want. And since it's not right for me to use a gun and point it at you, I will persuade you to do what I want, to buy what I want, to support the causes I want. And so that's why we opened up this class talking about rhetoric as a discourse of power. And epistemology is at the heart of this. So think about these ideas, grab onto them, and they will lead you to the right places. You have a great day.